past that rain by Thursday, putting down quite a bit across our part of the world. And then showery on Friday, but high pressure regaining control into next weekend. Temperatures dipping a bit, but it should be dry. Bye-bye.
The end of the long goodbye. The nation says its final farewell to Queen Elizabeth with a magnificent funeral like no other. A state occasion, of course, but a family affair too. A family's private grief played out in public. Even the youngest members doing their duty and doing their great-grandmother proud. The heavy weight of the past 10 days so clearly evident.
All who follow the Queen's example and inspiration of trust and faith in God can with her say, we will meet again.
We are live in Windsor after a day of magnificent ceremonial as the country put its proudest face forward to the world. Now the Queen will be reunited with her beloved husband, sister and parents in an intimate burial service away from public view. As the hearse brought their Queen home at last, crowds came in their thousands to welcome her and to say goodbye.
It's just nice to be here at the end, really. I've watched her all the way down from Balmoral.
In city squares, local pubs and living rooms, the country gathered together to pay tribute.
Even though we didn't manage to go down there and be a part of that in London, we still felt a part of it, even though we wasn't actually there.
And alongside the kings and queens, the princes and presidents, the heroes invited to play a part in this momentous day.
It was an amazing moment in there. Everyone was taking in the moment and paying their respect for someone who gave us everything.
From Windsor, this is ITV Evening News with Mary Nightingale.
Good evening from Windsor Castle, where Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth is about to be laid to rest after the nation and indeed the world said goodbye. She will be placed alongside her husband, her sister and her parents in a private ceremony. It follows a day of stunning spectacle, a state funeral on a scale never seen before. Hundreds attended the services in Westminster and here in Windsor. Thousands of military were involved in the parades. Tens of thousands lined the route outside and millions more watched from home. The events and those who took part reflected the person the Queen was and how she wants us to remember her. She played an active part in its planning and it was carried out flawlessly. A fitting tribute to the monarch and her wishes. The centrepiece was the state funeral service in Westminster Abbey, attended by family, world leaders and heroes too from everyday life. The Archbishop of Canterbury spoke of the remarkable outpouring of love witnessed over the past 12 days. The service here in Windsor was even more personal and perhaps even more poignant too. The Queen's crown, orb and sceptre were removed before her coffin was lowered into the royal vault as a lone piper played. Here's Romilly Weeks on the Queen's final journey.
The sound of the Abbey's muffled bell. A moment of perfect stillness, as though the country itself was holding its breath. And then, because happen it must, the Queen left Westminster Hall this morning. For the armed forces, a last act of duty for their commander-in-chief. For her children and grandchildren following, a last act of love for their mother. The massed pipes and drums of the Scottish and Irish regiments leading the procession to the Abbey where Elizabeth was married, crowned, and now mourned. A congregation of royalty, presidents and prime ministers standing for a queen who'd met them all. For closest family, their private grief on public show. Hard for those experienced in the rituals of royal life. For the youngest, Princess Charlotte and Prince George, a daunting test. In the very centre of the Abbey, the Queen's coffin. The country's beating heart stilled.
We come to this house of God, to a place of prayer. Here, where Queen Elizabeth was married and crowned, we gather from across the nation, from the Commonwealth, and from the nations of the world, to mourn our loss, to remember her long life of selfless service, and in sure confidence to commit her to the mercy of God, our Maker and Redeemer.
The Prime Minister read the lesson.
Let not your heart be troubled. Ye believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you.
Music echoing down the years, this a hymn sung at the Queen's wedding.
People of loving service are rare in any walk of life. Leaders of loving service are still rarer. And we pray today especially for all her family, grieving as every family at a funeral, including so many families round the world who have themselves lost someone recently. But in this family's case, doing so in the brightest spotlight. Her late Majesty's broadcast during COVID lockdown ended with, "We will meet again." Service in life, hope in death. All who follow the Queen's example and inspiration of trust and faith in God can with her say, "We will meet again." Let us commend to the mercy of God, our Maker and Redeemer, the soul of Elizabeth, our late Queen.
The last post before the Abbey fell silent. Raw emotion on the face of the King at our changed national anthem. And this was how the late Queen wanted it to end, her piper turning and walking away as the sound of his lament faded over the Abbey. In loving and devoted memory, Charles R., the card on her wreath reads, "Myrtle from her wedding bouquet and rosemary for remembrance among the flowers," as though anyone here would forget. Under the eyes of the Queen's family, almost every world leader from across the globe, and British Prime Ministers past and present, the greatest show of ceremony this country has put on for 7 decades. Past the cenotaph, flags lowered, and a royal salute. Every beat of this procession planned for decades, the applause of crowds. Past Buckingham Palace, but no homecoming this. the Queen's great-grandchildren solemn in their car. At Wellington Arch, the coffin transferred from gun carriage to state hearse for the last leg of the journey to Windsor. This route designed to allow the greatest numbers to come to say their goodbyes. And come they did. Bicycles abandoned as the procession passed, the Queen's way strewn with flowers. In Windsor's great park, so beloved of the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh, the procession reassembled. A long walk of pageantry, not just fit for a queen, fit for this Queen. Waiting for her coffin at the castle, her adored corgis Mick and Sandy, and her fell pony Emma, who she rode into her 90s. You have to imagine the Queen would have smiled at that. In through the gates of Windsor Castle, and on to St George's Chapel, where the Queen last year mourned her husband, sitting alone. The chapel today filled with family and members of her household, past and present. Memories of the late Duke threaded through the music. This Kentuckian of the departed was played at his funeral too.
We give special thanks for the life of thy daughter Elizabeth, for the mercy she received from thee, and for the example that through her life of service, love, and faith, she has set before our eyes.
The orb and sceptre removed from the coffin and placed on the altar, the sovereign's power symbolically relinquished. Without the imperial state crown, the coffin looking suddenly bare. The breaking of the Lord Chamberlain's wand, the end of his service to the Queen. At this, the end of her service to us.
It hath pleased Almighty God to take out of this transitory life unto his divine mercy the late, most high, most mighty, and most excellent monarch, Elizabeth II, by the grace of God, of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of her other realms and territories, Queen.
The Queen's coffin lowered into the royal vault to be reunited with her late husband. Her promise kept, her duty done. The burden of kingship now falling on her grieving son. Romilly Weeks, ITV News.
And with me now is our Royal Editor, Chris Shipp. I mean, one almost runs out of words. A state occasion, but very much a family at the heart of it. And we saw the face of the King there. grief-stricken, exhausted. This is a family too, isn't it?
Yeah, do you know, Mary, today was all about goodbyes. There were like goodbyes from presidents and prime ministers. There were goodbyes from the crowds who were both in London and here. Goodbyes from the military. Remember, it's her military saying goodbye to their commander-in-chief. And also what struck me was just goodbyes from those who'd worked really closely with her. We saw one of her footmen walking along, not only in London, but also here in Windsor, walking and walking and walking. These were very long processions today. But I don't think anyone will complain for a second that tonight this family is having a very private moment behind those castle walls in there, inside St George's Chapel, in fact in the very corner of St George's Chapel, where the late Queen is being laid to rest with her late husband, but also in the same place where her mother and father are. No cameras, no one to comment on their grief, no one to share the grief with them, because this is their own very private moment. And I think at the end of the day, we should remember that, and as we go into the following week and there's royal mourning, which will last for another 7 days, we have to think about them. But you're right to say that, when we were looking at the King and everything he's been through this week, both saying goodbye, but also cementing his role as a new king, I mean, I don't think anyone will be able to forgive him for what's etched on his face. And it was, I think, people's hearts will go out to him and everything that he's been through.
Absolutely. He's lost his mum after all, hasn't he? Chris, for the moment, thank you. Well, tens of thousands of people played their part in today's extraordinary event, patiently waiting in Westminster and Windsor and lining the route taken by the state hearse. Many in the huge crowds had stood for hours or even made makeshift camps overnight despite the cold. Some applauded, some bowed their heads, some cried, but all were determined to pay their respects and say one last goodbye. Geraint Vincent heard from some of them.
At the start of a day the like of which few have seen, a famous thoroughfare made ready. At the edges, those with duty still to do, sometimes lit with gold, but waiting behind the barriers, the people.
Tired, very, very tired. No sleep.
No sleep?
No sleep, no, but worth it, isn't it? Can't miss it, can you?
Show me where you slept.
There, that's my bed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I've seen worse.
Oh, so this is 5-star then.
Bless him, he's travelled from Telford to come down to us in Hertford, and we brought him in, and he's literally just gone to sleep.
He's been awake all night.
Awake all night, he's literally just gone.
I've actually got my grandson's jacket on, and he's 6 feet tall. I'm about 5'2", but it's very thick and it covered all of the.
There were hours of anticipation, and then through the air came the sound of beautiful voices, the start of the funeral service, broadcast in its entirety here, and the 2-minute silence that started inside the Abbey spread all the way along the road up to the palace.
It was beautiful, loved it.
Felt like you were part of it out here.
Yeah, I do. I did. It's really lovely. It was a lovely, lovely music, lovely service. It's wonderful.
When the procession began, phones were hoisted high in the air, and railings and lampposts and ladders were climbed. What can you see?
I can see loads of soldiers, and I think I can see the Queen's carriage.
What do you think of all the bands?
I think it's really good, and I can't wait to see the Queen.
It really was extraordinary, very moving, uplifting, and an extraordinary thing to witness, I think. It really was, yeah.
I think it was the last hurrah for Her Majesty.
Out in London's greener suburbs, the crowd still came to see the cortege through with stories of a long reign.
It brings all the memories back from Nairobi, where I was born, and my mother in 1952 went and waved at the Queen, young Queen.
And then at Windsor, the last long walk, where the people are very close to Journey's End.
It's just nice to be here at the end, really. I've watched it all the way down from Balmoral on the TV, and I've been into London a few times, so I'm just glad to be here.
The crowd packed into the spaces leading up to the castle. She was a queen they loved, and as dusk fell at the end of this day, they had seen her all the way home. Geraint Vincent, ITV News.
Well, we saw some of the biggest crowds lining the routes through central London and also here in Windsor. Neil Connery is in the Mall and Rebecca Barry is in Windsor for us. Let's turn to you first of all, Neil. Thousands clearly wanted to be part of today's events, didn't they?
Huge crowds here, Mary, determined to show their gratitude, to pay their respects and to be a part of history. As we were hearing there, many people taking pictures and videos, some had their heads bowed, others were in tears. And what really struck me today was when the gun carriage carrying Her Late Majesty made its way along the Mall, the way the applause travelled either side of it. And when it passed Buckingham Palace, I think many in the crowd here, and I suspect at home, were reflecting on all those occasions over the years when we saw Queen Elizabeth on the balcony of the palace during happier occasions like weddings and jubilees. And yet here today was the very last time. Members of the royal household made their way to the front of the palace to pay their respects. It was a very, very moving experience to watch. And one woman I was talking to in the crowd here today just said to me simply, "We have been blessed."
Well, those images of the long walk here in Windsor really were remarkable. Centuries from now, they'll illustrate to future generations just how the British public mourned and marked the end of the Second Elizabethan age. As we saw the royal standard raised here above Windsor Castle, signalling that the new sovereign was on the estate, I witnessed the raw emotion of people here as they said goodbye to our last monarch and welcomed the next as the coffin rolled past St George's Gate just up from here, followed by the King, the sound of the drums marking the slow footsteps. I was standing with members of the royal household as they fell silent. Some members of the catering staff bowed their heads, some wiped away tears. Even the police officer on duty gave a salute, then began to cry. High-ranking or not, this has affected so many echelons of British society.
Rebecca Barry in Windsor and Neil Connery in the Mall. Thank you. Well, tributes were paid right across the UK. Many gathered in front of giant TV screens showing the day's events. Pubs up and down the country also fell quiet as the funeral service was shown. Others watched it with friends and family at home, as Rachel Younger reports.
Whether watching through the rain in city squares, or paying tribute to the Queen from some filled stadiums, in every corner of the kingdom she loved, they came to say goodbye. And though you cannot stop time, today a country tried. On the Mersey, busy pubs fell cathedral quiet, heads bowed and glasses raised. It wasn't only the abbeys in Windsor and Westminster that saw ceremony today, and particularly for those who'd served, that mattered.
You could see that the whole world come together, and again, even though we didn't manage to go down there and be a part of that in London, you still felt a part of it even though we wasn't actually there.
To watch it and like to be with family as well, not on your own, it's all quite sad, so you just want to be with other people.
In Middlesbrough, a steelmaking town fell silent for its sovereign. Children who just 3 months ago rejoiced at her jubilee, now pin-drop silent. The polished pageantry of the capital a world away, but there's the same respect in every thoughtful gesture here for a woman whose face was as familiar as family.
It was a mum. Just, it hits home, doesn't it, when you lose somebody really close.
She definitely connected with people all over. I've not realised how much a connection was until sort of she's passed away, really.
Outside, a hastily arranged bank holiday saw some streets fall completely still. Schools suspended, shops shut, and seafronts silent. Hard not to think of lockdown and the late Queen's reassurance that we will meet again. But it's hard to believe there will ever be anyone who brings us together like she did. The same generation that crowded around newfangled televisions to cheer her coronation, gathering again to say an almost impossible goodbye. This final chapter, not an easy one to watch, but even here, amongst the sorrow, there were smiles.
It was very, very good, and I wouldn't have liked to have missed it, but I've seen it now. I loved it. I enjoyed it.
Fantastic. I really, really enjoyed it. Been watching it all the time.
And that's how we've tried to take her death in, sticking close on our sofas, remembering together.
She bridged the gaps where the politicians couldn't, didn't she? She got people together.
You got to love her, and it permeates in you to think about her and with her families and how everyone cares about her, for she cares about people.
One country, 10 days to say goodbye, to understand our Queen is gone, but not the ties that bind us. Rachel Younger, ITV News.
Well, let's get more from across the home nations now. Our Scotland correspondent Peter Smith is in Edinburgh, Tracy McGee is in Belfast, and Rhys Williams is in Cardiff. Turning to you first, Peter, how did people where you are pay tribute?
It was a much quieter, very sombre affair today compared to the scenes we saw exactly a week ago when the Queen's coffin left the Palace of Holyrood House just behind me here and travelled up the Royal Mile to lie at rest in St Giles Cathedral. At that point there were thousands of people on the streets. They had followed her journey from Balmoral to here. Today we're talking about hundreds, not thousands, who were in Holyrood Park to watch this on a big screen. There was a lone piper on Royal Yacht Britannia. I don't think we should read too much into this, the lack of numbers on the streets. People were content to pay quiet respect at home and watch the service at home. Scotland has already played its part, and it will forever be written in history as the place that the second Elizabethan age came to an end. The people here had had their chance to say goodbye, and today was an opportunity to remember that this is the place the Queen had drawn so many happy days from, and the people had given her so much life.
Across Northern Ireland, people gathered in church and community halls to watch the funeral service, or at big screen events such as the one here at Belfast City Hall. They came from all walks of life, all ages. Now, it has to be said, in the nationalist community there was not the same feeling of loss and grief, but most people here speak of their respect for a leader who tried to build bridges. And those efforts were rewarded today with the sight of the leaders of the political parties at Stormont, so far unable to sit together in government, but willing to sit alongside one another in Westminster Abbey. Among them, Sinn Féin's leader here and First Minister in waiting, Michelle O'Neill. 10 years ago, no one could have imagined such a scene. Today, due to her genuine efforts to build peace, Queen Elizabeth has made the impossible possible.
Well, just 3 days ago, thousands of people lined the streets here in Llandaff in the north of Cardiff, hoping to see Charles III on his first ever visit to Wales as king. He attended a service of prayer and reflection at the cathedral here behind me before coming up to meet many people on the green. A very different atmosphere here today, similar to what Peter was saying in Scotland. Eerily quiet here in Llandaff. Clearly many people taking the opportunity for some quiet reflection at home. Unlike in other parts of the UK, there were no big screens in any town or city centre in Wales, but many people came together in cinemas, in pubs, in community centres, in churches and chapels. Many of them opened their doors across the country, giving people an opportunity to come together to mourn Queen Elizabeth II.
Rhys Williams, Tracy McGee and Peter Smith, thank you. Events here, and before we do move on, I'm going to draw your attention to this amazing sunset behind me. Look at the colour of the setting sun on the stones of Windsor Castle there. Magnificent. So both here and in Westminster, where the pictures were broadcast across the world to an audience of tens of millions, perhaps even billions, all witnessed a stunning display of pageantry as a nation said a sombre farewell. Emma Murphy now on how the world watched.
Her monarchy stretched far beyond British shores, so too the pageantry to mark the passing of the Elizabethan era. In Canada, one of the Queen's 15 realms, a service of national commemoration to honour her contribution to the nation. The Queen was the most travelled monarch in history and had visited Canada on 22 occasions. As her funeral drew to a close in Windsor, a 96-gun salute marked every year of her life. In Kenya, where her reign began and the world saw the first pictures of Queen Elizabeth, they watched the images marking the end of her reign, remembering how a young princess became a monarch in their country. In Hong Kong, those who couldn't be part of the London service gathered at the British consulate.
I remember I was at Princess Diana's funeral, I was at the Queen Mother's funeral, and to feel that level of grief and loss, but not to be able to be part of it, makes it harder.
In Australia, where she visited 16 times, her image was cast onto the Sydney Opera House. In the United States, some gathered at dawn to be part of a moment of global significance.
She was such an icon of leadership, of self-sacrifice to her country and people, and a great inspiration.
She seemed to be a person steady and committed, regardless of the forces of life that inevitably come upon us. She just seemed to really be a rock of a human being, someone who held steady.
In Nepal, prayers were said for a monarch who visited the country twice, as candles burned at a shrine to honour the late Queen. In Malta, where the Queen made her first state visit and her last, a gun salute marked her memory as a much-travelled monarch made her final journey. Emma Murphy, ITV News.
And our correspondent Dan Rivers is in Sydney tonight. Dan, I chatted to teams and teams of Australian journalists outside the Abbey today. All of them had been broadcasting all night, of course. How have Australians reacted to today's events?
Well, I think most Australians have been viewing the amazing pictures here, which have been broadcast through the evening here, with a mixture of sadness and affection for the Queen. Of course, there's no physical place for them to go and watch anything here, so this was largely a TV event for many people here. And talking to one of the executives of the networks here, they said that internet traffic during the broadcast here in the evening dropped off very low indeed, suggesting most people were tuning in to watch this television broadcast, which has been carried on all of the main networks here. The viewing figures are likely to be among the largest in Australian television history. We'll get those numbers by the morning. It will, of course, be now a moment that Australia starts to look to the future. This last 10 days has really quelled the Republican debate here as everyone pays respects to the Queen, and that tone has been set by the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. Looking forward, though, now there may be questions about where Australia goes from here. He's already ruled out any idea of having a referendum on a republic in the next 3 years or so. I think most Australian people will have their own memories. The Queen came here 11 times over 57 years, and everyone will be reflecting on their own memories of her coming to Australia. One thing that struck me, talking to someone watching in a pub last night, he said he thought after all of this coverage that support for the monarchy would actually grow.
All right, Dan Rivers in Sydney, thank you. Well, here there was exceptionally tight security today as world leaders attended the funeral. It was the Met Police's biggest ever operation, but there were diplomatic concerns too, as our global security editor Rohit Kachru reports.
Never before this morning had so many British police officers been brought together for one event. And through the silence, the sound of the drum beats approached. And this enormous operation, codenamed London Bridge, reached its most frenetic moments.
No pressure, I'll come.
Among the mourners were kings and queens and presidents and prime ministers and people from everywhere in their hundreds of thousands. President Biden arrived with special permission to use his armoured limousine, nicknamed the Beast. And then the buses. Most leaders were told to give up their diplomatic cars to use this unfamiliar form of transport. Of course, these are leaders who normally hold discussions around conference tables. Today they meet on a bus, wearing black. Like at all funerals, some of the guests have history. Britain's friends and acquaintances came, from democracies to dictatorships to everything in between. Whatever their title, the grandeur of the day, of the moment silenced all, politics could wait for now. China sent its vice president. Pleasantries, but little connection. And he sat far from the American president, tucked in, down the aisle, on row 14, the Polish leader in front of him, the Czech leader behind. No wonder she has become known by some as the Queen of the World. That's down in part to the history of a one-time imperial monarch, but it's down to her too, and her book of condolence drew signatures from leaders everywhere.
It's a loss not only to the royal family, it's a loss not only to the UK, it's a loss to all of us, both in the Commonwealth and outside.
There's a world of pressing global issues which they might have discussed under different circumstances. But tonight the normal rules of international diplomacy resume without a unique figure. Rohit Kachru, ITV News, Westminster Abbey.
Members of the public were also invited to be among the mourners inside the Abbey today. They included a father of two who gave out free meals during the pandemic and a brave anti-knife campaigner who'd been attacked whilst pregnant. Also, there was Johnson B. Harry, who became the first living soldier in nearly 50 years to receive the Victoria Cross for his own selfless acts of bravery. Ben Chapman heard from some of the Queen's heroes.
At the heart of this funeral was the Queen's lifetime of service. Fitting then that in the congregation was a privileged few hundred whom she'd recognised for theirs. Among them, Johnson B. Harry, whom the Queen awarded the Victoria Cross, the highest award for bravery, following his service in Iraq.
It's the first time I shed a tear. It really sinks in when I hear the national anthem and I have to sing it. Because for almost 22 years, I've been singing the national anthem we know, and now the words change, and that's when I really feel it.
He wore his medal for only the fourth time today, but the service took him back to the day he received it.
It was the scariest day of my life. And she said to me, "You're a very special person. I don't get to do this very often." And then the light bulb came on and I realized I'm in front of Her Majesty. But I remember how easy it was to communicate with her. And I took that in with me.
Commitment to community, as well as country, was also recognised with invitations. Pranav and Natalie both received MBEs in the Queen's last birthday honours list. Pranav's for his volunteering work during the pandemic.
Seeing the coffin as up close as I did really brought home the fact that our Queen is no longer. And quite honestly, it was at that point I had a lump in my throat, and actually it brought back feelings of other funerals I've been to, including my own grandfather's funeral.
For Natalie, who's campaigned against knife crime, it was a surreal experience.
You've got President Biden going past, and you've got former prime ministers, and then obviously then the royal family, and you're thinking, but I'm just Natalie from Birmingham, but I'm still part of this. But I think that's a real testament to the Queen.
Was there a particular moment which really moved you?
I think it was seeing King Charles and seeing the rest of the royal family, and you could really feel that emotion. And I think that really sort of got you inside, because you can think they're saying goodbye to their mother, their grandmother, and that moment will always stay with me.
They are images that many of us will long remember, but those who witnessed them in person are unlikely ever to forget. Ben Chapman, ITV News.
Well, another of those heroes playing a part in the state funeral today was health worker May Parsons, who delivered the world's first COVID-19 vaccine. She met the Queen and she accepted the George Cross on behalf of NHS England in July. And I'm delighted to say that May joins me now. May, thank you for your time this evening. What did it mean to take part in today's extraordinary events?
It meant the world, and obviously with the Queen being herself and a staunch supporter of the NHS and what it stands for, it's such an honour and a privilege to kind of represent all of NHS England with me today to say our farewell and pay our respects to our Queen. So it's a very surreal, sombre, sad day, but also an opportunity to reflect on what our Queen has done for us.
The Queen was very vocal, wasn't she, during COVID? And we all remember that wonderful speech she made saying that we will meet again. What did that mean to you and your NHS England colleagues at that time?
That was a really difficult moment for us, as you know. Challenging, not just for the NHS workers and health workers, but for all of us. And I think coming from the Queen, it's kind of given us, we look up to her for strength and for the service that she's shown us, and it's role modelling what service, true service, looks like. And it kind of resonates with the service that we do in our communities. So the Queen has shown us the way, or led the way, in terms of recognising that we will get through the challenges that we were having, and that there is hope. And I think that is what ultimately she's given a lot of us on that day, and it meant tremendously a lot.
May, I can see you're still very emotional. It was obviously a hugely moving day. You met the Queen, didn't you? You accepted the George Cross. What did she say to you? What was it like?
She was so welcoming, and she was so warm and funny. Her sense of humour that day was still on point, considering, and she made us so welcome in her home. And I think, the saying that they say to you, that a person that made you feel the way that they did is something that you would remember rather than the words that they said. And that is what the Queen has done for me. She's, welcomed me in her home, presented me with the George Cross for all of the NHS staff in England, and that was something that obviously we were really, really grateful for.
Yes.
And yeah, it was a surreal moment, and obviously such a nice
never
moment.
Forget it, May, will you?
No, absolutely not. No, I don't think so. Neither today.
I'll let you go now. It's been a big day, May Parsons. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Well, family was at the very heart of today's events, which saw Prince George and Princess Charlotte play a prominent role. George, who's 9, and 7-year-old Charlotte were the youngest mourners in Westminster Abbey. Watched by the world, they helped escort their great-grandmother's coffin through the Abbey and also at Windsor. And as Chloe Keedy reports, the young royals showed the future of the monarchy is in pretty safe hands.
The frown on his face suggested that young Prince George understood that this would be a difficult day. He and his sister Charlotte are grieving for their great-grandmother, but they're also learning what it means to live these private moments in a very public way. As Westminster Abbey's bell tolled, 9-year-old George glanced up and seemed for a moment to be taking in the enormity of it all. And it is difficult to imagine a more daunting duty than the one that lay ahead. Walking behind the Queen's coffin, next to his father, and watched by the world.
They might have felt a bit nervous, also extra upsetting because they had to go in front of the crowd when their great nan's just died. So I think that it's important that kids are involved in the royal family, because some people, they don't even know there were any, they just thought, oh yeah, the Queen. I'm proud of them because they're carrying on with life and they're not letting anything stop them from carrying on.
And that is something these children will have to get used to. The Queen's Platinum Jubilee celebrations gave us, and them, a glimpse of what the future will be. Of course, they also have lots of personal memories of the great-grandmother they called Gan Gan. Princess Charlotte wore a brooch that was given to her by the Queen as she and her brother took their places on this most historic of days.
You know, this is a message about the continuity of the monarchy and the future, and the fact that these people, at least Prince George, at some point is going to inherit.
But more than the future, today was about the past. And for these two children, it was about saying goodbye to the great-grandmother they loved. Chloe Keedy, ITV News.
Back with our royal editor Chris Shipp, and just looking at a 7- and a 9-year-old, remarkable.
Well, you know, exemplary behaviour for people so young. But I was talking. Well, listen. I think there will be a debate about whether or not they should have done that. In such, you know, the eyes of the world were on them today. A royal source said to me that look, they did discuss it as a family, and they decided they did want to do it. And also, that image that it gave us was of a late Queen, the new King, and then two future kings filing behind that coffin today, and that's doing what, you know, monarchy is meant to do. It's showing that it's constant, it's showing that it's continuing, and that's exactly what we saw today.
I'm going to set you an impossible task now. Sum up what we've seen over the last 10, 11 days. We've been there almost every step of the way.
Listen, I think people keep trying to ask me to do this. Look, I mean, whether you have seen all of these things in person, whether you saw the hearse drive in Scotland or London, whether you were in the crowds today, whether you filed for the queuing in state, or whether you just watched it on television, look, it's been momentous. You know, it's been history making. But, you know, I think we live in a society where death is often hidden. This Queen didn't want her death to be hidden. She wanted to be seen. So whether that is the hearse with the lights in it that she helped to design, whether that is the state gun carriage that she was carried through London in such spectacular ceremonial fashion today, she wanted to be seen in death. And so we had that finality of that moment when her coffin was lowered into the royal vault. Everyone saw it, and she wanted everyone to see it.
And you and I will never forget it, will we? Chris, thank you. And that brings our programme to an end on the day the nation stopped to say goodbye to our Queen. Her final journey was filled with stunning images, starting with her coffin being borne on a gun carriage to Westminster Abbey. There was a breathtaking state funeral service before she was carried past Buckingham Palace for the very last time, and on to Windsor through huge crowds. Well, tonight, her coffin is about to be placed in the King George VI Chapel here in Windsor Castle, alongside her beloved husband, her sister, and her late parents. After a lifetime in front of us and the cameras, our ever-present figurehead, the Queen will be laid to eternal rest out of public sight in a private ceremony. The final chapter in a truly remarkable life. Good night.
swear before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong.
He is someone who doesn't take easily to compliments, but he has quite simply been my strength and stay all these years. Over the years, those who have seemed to me to be the most happy, contented and fulfilled have always been the people who have lived the most outgoing and unselfish lives. Change has become a constant. Managing it has become an expanding discipline. The way we embrace it defines our future. Better days will return. We will be with our friends again. We will be with our families again. We will meet again.
Good evening to you. Mostly dry for many of us, for the time being at least. We've got sunny spells and patchy cloud as the week wears on, and feeling mild given the time of year. Temperatures doing a little better than we'd expect for the middle of September. A huge area of high pressure in control of our weather as the week wears on. Generally fine settled conditions. This system the only glitch, tickling fringes of northwestern Scotland and Northern Ireland. Some drizzly rain to come. Otherwise, with the fine dry conditions, we draw in milder air from the mid-Atlantic, and temperatures doing quite well come the middle of the week, particularly for this point in the autumn. As for the next few hours, clearer skies to end the day across the west, thicker cloud for the rest of us. The thickest cloud producing some spots of drizzly rain now and again across the southeast. As the night wears on, staying a little damp across the islands of Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland. We'll see some patchy drizzle, but otherwise a dry night. The cloud coming and going. Where we keep the cloud cover reasonably mild. Where it stays a little clearer, pockets of mist and murk developing, as you'd expect for this point in September. And also those temperatures just a touch lower in rural spots come dawn, so here a little chillier for those up bright and early. Into tomorrow, a mixture of brighter skies and cloud. And for most of us, as the cloud wafts around, bright rather than sunny skies as the day wears on. Staying a little dull and damp across the northwest of Scotland here, and temperatures not doing quite so well. For the rest of us, a mild feel to the day. Highs of 20 degrees or so through the afternoon. Any sunshine really making all the difference, but it will be a little limited with that cloud from time to time. Into Wednesday and split fortunes. Patchy cloud through parts of Scotland, Northern England, Northern Ireland, a bit of a breeze, and staying a little drizzlier across the northwest of Scotland. Otherwise, well, cheerful blue skies and warm September sunshine, lifting temperatures to 22 degrees or so through the afternoon.
Now on ITV, a nation remembers Her Majesty the Queen.